Hello, and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and with me, as always, is our co-host, our Chief of Research, Derek Cohen. And I'll just go ahead and introduce our guest now, because we want to jump into it and do a wrap-up here, Derek, of the legislative session. Our guest at the end of the year, I guess this is near going to do end of session as well, is Brad Johnson. He's a senior reporter at the Texan, which is our favorite paper, favorite media, the evil media. The biased media. No, I'm just kidding. Brad, thanks for being on the show as always.
Yeah, appreciate it. It's tradition now.
Man, well,
third time.
Yeah, is it 3 times?
Well,
now?
4 if you don't count the convention.
Yeah, we were at convention.
Where we kept promising, and any final showed up.
We had a booth about the size of this table. It was all cramped in there. But I always want to get a hot takes first. The biggest story of the day is the fallout between Trump and Elon Musk. Is the big feud that's going on there. I'm sure it's only just begun. But that got me thinking, what are this is a big divorce. They're calling it a divorce between Trump and Elon. What is the craziest celebrity divorce? Is it any one of Brad Pitt's divorces or Ben Affleck, or maybe the Princess Diana and the King? That's another big one. What's in your world? What was the craziest divorce? Brad, we'll start with you.
Well, when you sent me this question, I just did a quick Google search, and I was surprised at how many of the names I did not recognize that were in the most recent celebrity divorce.
A celebrity carries a lot of water in that particular question.
Right. I think you got to go with the OG, Brangelina breaking up.
Brad Pitt.
Angelina Jolie. I'm going to go with that one, at least because that's one that I am aware of.
So, Derek, are you going with Kanye and Kim?
No. That's again, we're trying to keep that E rating, buddy. I'd have to go with. I don't know if you remember this back in our day. You remember Chris Martin of Coldplay?
I remember Coldplay. Sure.
He was married to Gwyneth Paltrow for quite some time there. And
was that before or after her weird candle line that she did?
I think she was weird the whole time, yet it couldn't be said. But remember, because they had this whole new agey thing, the whole we're not getting a divorce, we're consciously decoupling, and that was the whole thing. And I was just like. Wow. Up to that point, the only time I'd ever heard decoupling was in a train yard, because when you take cars off of a locomotive, it's called decoupling, that just scarred itself into my brain, and I think those are 2 weirdest people who ever got divorced, probably. But
political divorces, the one that I thought of that was really significant, that had a lot of impact, was of course the divorce between Senator Ryan at the time in Illinois and Jerry Ryan, the actor or the actress. Because they got divorced, that's what opened up all of the details of what happened in their marriage, which then of course led to him not being able to run again. And who took that seat but a state senator named Barack Obama, who then went on to, of course, destroy the country with Obamacare.
That's a real Trump touching the orb story you got there, Brian.
Just saying, that was a political divorce.
16 Harambe got shot.
Well, if I can't remember, it's not Paul Ryan, obviously, but can't remember the guy's name, but the Senator Ryan. But anyway, if he hadn't had all that and the situation explode out into the media, we never would have had Barack Obama, and who knows where we'd be in the country right now. So anyway, all right, moving on to the reason why we're actually here, which is our shameless plug for our newsletter, TexasPolicy.com/thepost. If you're not signed up, go and get signed up. I tell you every week what's in it, so just go and get signed up if you're not already signed up. But a lot of fun stuff, Texas stuff, and exclusive stories from yours truly. All right, let's get to Brad. Brad, senior reporter at the Texan. All right, let's do a wrap up here. We'll start with our guest. Our guest first. What's your narrative of the 89th Texas legislature?
Well, going into it, there was this historical amount of enmity, particularly in the House, over the speaker fights. We'd never seen anything like it. It was, especially looking back on it, amazing to get to witness and follow so closely for me. Probably my favorite story that I've written over the last 6 years that I've been doing this. But everyone thought, this thing's headed off the rails really fast, and it's going to stay off the rails. Dan Patrick is lieutenant governor is openly criticizing the speaker before he even gets in office yet, and particularly the way he got in. But that just didn't happen. I mean, this was as you said before, the Kumbaya session. I thought the Kumbaya session was 2019, right? No, it was really kind of this.
We were so young and innocent.
Yeah. And I'm kind of floored that they were able to make their way through this without taking the gloves off and swinging at each other so much.
Yeah, I mean, the big three were meeting. I think halfway through the session started having breakfast once a week.
The breakfasts were back, yeah.
The breakfast, yeah. There's pictures. The governor's office would put out pictures of them, shaking hands and breaking bread together, which was good to see.
And you'd probably be the better source on this, Brad. But is there any correlation with the fact that we have this comity among the big three the same year they reintroduced the breakfast bowl in Capitol in the lunchroom?
Well, we can't really, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio here on this. I think you'd probably say
it's at least correlated, if not causal.
Right.
But what were the downstream effects of that? I mean, are there specific bills where there could have blown up the session, whether it's bail or even ESAs or something like that, where there were real disagreements on issues, maybe property tax, something like that? Are there specific bills that in other, had there not been that relationship, you think those bills would have blown up session or wouldn't have gotten done?
Well, I think the speaker took a lot of lessons from the last session, and he didn't push an appraisal cap in the property tax deal. He actually agreed pretty early on, according to Lieutenant Governor, on general outlines of the property tax stuff. I think the thing that really could have sent things off the rails was THC, and that SB3 passed. There was a lot of fight over that. There's still a lot of fight. Does the governor veto it? I don't know. I kind of think he lets it go into effect, doesn't sign it, but also doesn't veto it.
Yeah.
We'll see.
We have that strange anti-pocket veto thing in Texas that most states don't have.
So I think that one could have derailed things, except for the fact that, based on everything I've heard, Burrows was personally for this. Now, a lot of people in his chamber were not, and depending on who he emphasized in that power struggle, that could cause things to go off the rails, especially with how much the lieutenant governor put into this. Like, he was personally offended by a lot of the coverage of this and a lot of the criticism that he himself was getting from veterans groups, the industry, THC selling industry itself. He had the whole press conference where he just basically brought all the reporters in and told them how bad they were doing a job of covering this thing. And then he ended up throwing a bag of gummies at somebody.
Was that you?
It was not me. No.
You think it was like someone trying to catch the bouquet at a wedding?
Yeah.
Brad's diving in front of it.
I would have been tempted to just keep it. Just keep the bag.
Thank you, sir.
Instead
souvenir,
put it back up.
yeah.
Souvenir, or go sell it on the black market after this thing goes into effect.
Right?
Right?
September 1st,
Yeah.
But didn't they, the conservative critique from this, and Dana Lash and others, this made national news, criticizing this bill from the right, but didn't they address a lot of that through other House bills when they're House bill?
Yeah, the teacup expansion, the Texas compassionate use. There's still criticism thrown at it. For example, what's going to cost more, just being able to buy this stuff at a cake shop on the side of the road, or having to go enroll yourself in teacup and jump through the hoops of that? I think that's a fair question to ask. But overall, yeah, they did the teacup expansion gave a lot of Republicans cover to vote for this where they otherwise would not have.
So unexpected Kumbaya was Brad's narrative or narrative of the session. Derek, what's yours?
Yeah, and look, I just have to say that, and this is probably more of an offshoot of that than a standalone, some DLC, not a original content. I'd have to say that the alacrity and ability that which Speaker Burrows was able to get a chamber that was, until the day they gavelled in, completely in the dark as to what their future would look like, up and running, moving and cranking out bills. It was a little slow at first, but as when you don't know who the speaker is after the initial gavel drops, that's what's going to follow. But yeah, so I would say that because the Senate's always been much more parochial in the way it's run, and you always kind of there's always an understanding of where things are even before. There's not a lot of game time decisions that happen in the Senate. And I think that in doing so, Speaker Burrows has really been able to cement himself in, I would have thought we'd be having this, to your guys' point, that we'd be having this discussion here as we usually do. And we'd be saying, so what's next? Burrows hanging on by a thread, who's going to be the insurgent figure on the right that's going to challenge him. I'd be surprised. I would honestly be surprised if even from his own caucus, drew somebody that tried to push back just because of what he was able to get accomplished in the, in the handicap that was inherited at the beginning of the session.
Yeah, and that kind of feeds into what I think my narrative was looking at all this is, there's always that joke at the end, is this the most conservative session ever? It was a very conservative session in a very technical definition of what it means to be conservative, which is, we're not libertarians, we're obviously not progressives. We are the whole idea of ordered liberty, right? Which is that, it's not, we're not just flinging it and becoming the Wild West and everybody do what you want to do. There has to be
distributing weed at press conferences. That's not us.
There has to be some rules and regulations around, the way that things work. And so you can go through, legislation by legislation and see, look, on the one hand, we did bail reform. I mean, that's a very strict, it doesn't tie, in some cases it ties judges' hands, but it gives them the opportunity or the ability to, keep the streets safe from people who are threats. But at the same time, they were also giving access, more rights to the accused in some instances, particularly the ones who are considered what's the affirmative defense rule, where if you're being if you're being human trafficked or whatever, and you commit some crime, the duress, these are the rights of the accused, which is if you're acting, if you commit a crime under duress, you can use that as an affirmative. So it's right, it's right there in the middle in terms of various issues. Education, same thing. I mean, obviously we gave this new freedom to parents to be able to to use money how they suit best, but at the same time they did fund education, which is not, they'd put $8 billion back into the
still
system.
Underfunded though.
Yeah, still underfunded. So it was a not everything was like complete libertarian. Let's remove all the regulations, but at the same time I think it was a very, very conservative in a very technical definition of that.
Well, to jump off that, so 21 I think has an argument to be made to be, if we're calling things the most conservative session ever, which is of course a relative term, I think that had an argument to be the most conservative session, certainly in a long time, until this one. But the question is, there were two or three really marquee conservative policy wins in 21. The two abortion bills and then constitutional carry. This, my read on it is, on the aggregate, there was a lot more just totally more conservative legislation that passed. You look at the Texas GOP, they put out which has not been friendly to the House in any manner. They put out a press release that said we got 37 legislative priorities across the line. And I don't remember them ever talking about something like that before. So going into the next year, that's going to be an interesting thread to watch. How does the RPT itself manage its internal factions in marketing how this went? Because you still have the fact that Dustin Burrows got elected speaker with a majority Democratic coalition, and there's going to be people that will never forgive him for that, right? And so overall, though, it seems on the whole, on the aggregate, you can certainly make that argument.
Yeah, I mean, it happened the way that it happened, but I think the speaker definitely has proven himself that he was prioritizing conservative bills. I mean, that's one of the major things that the lieutenant governor has always complained about, is that the conservative bills go to the House to die, or they get watered down in some way. And that was not a criticism. I mean, that's the one thing he complains about consistently, which is like, this is Texas, conservatives elect Republicans in the legislature. We need to be passing conservative bills. And it seems like that happened by and large. So for people who are still upset about how he became speaker, it seems a little silly, because the proof is in the pudding, where we're getting conservative bills across the finish line.
And I think and I think if you look at the there are definitely an identifiable smattering of bills where, and this isn't picking at any of the personalities in the House or the Senate, but some Senate bills that, in order to keep the clean seas and the smooth sailing of the Senate, probably had to come out of the Senate weaker than they ended up after they went through the process in the House. And that's, again, because then it's a lot easier for an up and down conference when you only need a majority. But all that to say is, there's also a few of those where we can point out that the other way is true now as well. I would also go ahead.
The ESA bill, right? It was a stronger bill in the House.
Exactly, and that's to say nothing about SB2 in its original form.
Right.
I'm pretty sure we supported it.
Breaking news.
I was about to say, does this discharge our obligation?
Well, we would have supported the Buckley Compromise 2 years ago. I mean, that's,
But I bet there's a lot of people that wish they did.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that was, compared to what we ended up getting, getting written into law, it was weak.
And so that is just one of, many that the lieutenant governor has, by dint of the bill number, identified as one of his top priorities that arguably got stronger in the House. And again, that's not picking on the Senate, it's not picking on the lieutenant governor at all. It's just showing that, there are different outcomes that can come from different processes. And I think that here we've struck I don't want to say a balance point, but definitely a point that's more felicitous of that than it was in years past.
So let's jump into specific bills. We've kind of mentioned a few here and there, but first question I have for you, Brad, is the most consequential legislation you think outside of ESAs, because this is TPPF, so we have to say that.
I'll let you guys handle that one.
Yeah, outside of ESAs. What do you think the most consequential legislation will have the most impact on Texas?
I think it's got to be the water deal that was made. This state, with how much it's growing in population, it's going to need a lot more water over the next 50 years to support not just the population growth, but also the business growth that we're experiencing. Companies are definitely taking into account not just the power grid and their ability to get electricity when they need it, but also water supply. And it's just going to be very difficult to do it over the next 50. It's been difficult to build new water supply over the last 50 years, and that's why we're kind of in this pickle. And so the state allocated $2.5 billion immediately to the Water Development Board for projects for new, I think it's like the split's half and half, new projects versus existing, like fixing leaky pipes and whatnot. But overall, down for 20 more years, they're committing $1 billion every year, provided voters approve it at the ballot box this November. But without water, it's one of the basic necessities of life. Without water, the state's economic growth is going to take a hit. Yeah. And if they can figure this out, this is a good step in the right direction. But there's going to be a lot more that needs to be done to actually put things, build reservoirs or find new ways to do things like desalination plants. I'm going to go with the water deal that they did.
And Derek, on that one, that's one of those bills where you wouldn't think, conservatives generally don't like putting a bunch of money into a program, and spending a bunch of money, $20 billion. Is there a more efficient way we could do that? But that's one of those things. If there is something called a utility, certainly access to water would meet that definition, and that is absolutely something that the government should be able to guarantee to individuals.
Well, it's similar with public safety, right? Like we can all agree that public safety is a core part of
you don't want private courts and private police forces.
No, and that's why we're paying our judges so well. I'm surprised you left that one on the table. That and daylight savings time, man. What's wrong with you?
Oh man, I don't have that on my list. I gotta get it.
No,
Texas time.
But like to the point is that we had such a large outlay for Operation Lone Star for the years past. People would be like, that's a lot of money, and it's like it is, but there also is compelling. There's a compelling issue. Now, should the Texas citizen be footing that versus the U.S. citizen? That's where I think we can have a robust policy argument on that. But no, that is a central function of government, is to provide utilities. That's we come out of the state of nature to dig pipe trenches. I think Rawls said.
All right, Rousseau.
I think all that to say is that was a big one. The most consequential, at least in terms of the end there, because I thought it was. I said facetiously the judicial pay raise. It's funny though, because the judicial pay raise, I forget the number here, but that was one line on a 24-page bill. The rest of the bill had to do with the State Commission on Judicial Conduct. So I was paying an awful lot of attention for the first 23 pages of that bill. But towards the end, though, the issue of judicial pay raises popped up. Now, I'm not saying it's the most consequential, because unless you're a judge, you're not going to feel it. But that threatened, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, because you definitely had your ear closer to the ground on that one. That could have been the special fodder. That could have been the trigger had that not gone across the finish line, because both the outgoing Chief Justice, the incoming Chief Justice, the governor have all recognized that we haven't had a judicial pay raise, in what was it, since 2013. 2013. Yeah. And I'll be the first to tell you, I serve on the Commission for Judicial Conduct. Not all judges deserve a pay raise. There are some who probably deserve a cut, to say the least. But that being said, if that is going to be what you are indexing legislative retirement to after a certain vesting period, that's where it becomes a political football. And that's where I think we were going to have there were some times there in the last 2-3 days of session where I was like, this is going to blow it up. It's going to be this. But luckily that didn't come. Now, consequential, though, I mean, you said ESAs. I'd have to say, and this would be interesting. I think that one of the most consequential, because I think it kind of lays down a yard marker, is and this is a minor housekeeping bill, but moving the lottery from the Lottery Commission to TDLR. I think that tells you everything you need to know about the future of the lottery here in Texas. Now that's speculative, but that was my reading of those tea leaves.
Yeah, because it's cleaned out all the areas for fraud, and if you want to, because it didn't get rid of the lottery, right? It just so what is
not yet.
It's got a 2-year trial period. Yeah, and we'll see how it works under TDLR. But
I don't buy lottery tickets. I mean, I know some people are really into that, so I don't know. We'll see if it.
When Clint sends out the Powerball when it's
It was funny when that bill was on the House floor. My grandpa called me. He says, I just won $20,000 on a scratch-off ticket. What the?
Whoa!
Yeah, what timing for that?
Yeah.
Then I said,
did your grandpa get paid $50 per tweet? Come on.
I'm gonna save it for my under the radar bill, but I hope the most consequential bill is SB 12, which does a lot of things, and I'm going to talk about it in a little bit. But I hope that it really starts to change the culture in schools, and a lot of schools where parents start to get much more involved and understand what's really going on in the classrooms if they don't already. I mean, if you're a parent and you know exactly what your kids are reading every day and learning, and you have a great relationship with your teachers, God bless you, and I'm glad it's that way. But for a lot of people, that's not the case, and that's the way the schools want it. And so hopefully SB 12 will start to move all schools in a different direction. But I think the bail reform for sure. That's going to save people's lives. I mean, that's going to keep people in jail who are threats. And I think we talked with Nikki Presley from Right on Crime here, and this crazy this crazy procedure where people have to get bail in Texas. It's not like that in other states. And then they have to get bail commensurate with their ability to pay the bail, which is also insane because, it should be commensurate with the threat level. And we're seeing that with people, getting out on bail and then committing more crimes. And so hopefully, giving that power, again, it doesn't require the judges to deny bail, but it gives them the ability to, which is crazy. They never had that in the first place.
And you're definitely right that is a consequential bill. The reason I did not go with that for mine, though, is remember the biggest part of that we're not going to know until November whether or not it takes effect. And it's not as controversial a thing as, say, raising the age of the judiciary as it was the last time through. It's a little Easter egg for those who follow. But yeah, so that what you described, we're still waiting on the vote in November to see that makes it into the Constitution.
I'm talking a little bit about budget and spending because folks on the right have a legitimate gripe that we're spending too much here in Texas.
Because we are.
But our metric is population plus inflation. The problem is that population is exploding, and thanks to Biden, and a lot of Republicans too at the federal level. The inflation has been off the charts, and so it's basically given them a get-out-of-jail-free card to spend a lot more year after year, and then claim that we're doing the responsible thing by staying under population plus inflation. Should we start having the discussion about whether or not that's an effective metric for controlling spending?
Well, we're definitely going to have that. We're definitely having that discussion internally. In fact, we have a precursor to that meeting today after we're done here. I will say though, and I don't mean to speak for Chairman Caprillione, but he's said this outwardly, is while the efficiency tweaks were kind of the focus of DOGE, the delivery of government efficiency committee in the House this time through, he'd really like to see more of not just cuts for the sake of cuts, even though, again, don't threaten me with a good time, but he wants to see an approach more like that across the interim and over the subsequent coming session, so that they actually can start delivering government efficiency and spending, not just in function.
Brad, another one for conservatives is sort of the social conservative side of things. There weren't any LGBTQ big bills or whatever being pushed necessarily. Well, I mean, kind of. We'll get into some of that stuff. SB 12 has some of that. But, the Ten Commandments bill passed. There was also codifying the life of the mother exception for, were there any other social conservative bills that were maybe under the radar that if you are a social conservative organization, or that's like one of your main things, that you look out for, what do you think those groups got this session?
The one that comes to mind is actually one that didn't pass, and it was the Daniel Alders, what is that, requiring parental consent to see explicit books in public libraries.
Moving.
Not removing, but moving.
Yeah, they were just moving them from the kids section to the adult section.
Right. And then requiring, parents to give permission for them to access it.
Right.
That died in a weird way in the Senate. Lieutenant Governor actually caught a lot of flack for that. Stuff happens, right? Like nobody expected the judicial pay thing to be the thing that almost sent us into a special session, right? But things happen over the 140-day session. Also gives them material to work with next session. I guarantee you Alders will file it again.
Sure.
We'll have the fight out, and this thing will not fall by the wayside for various reasons. It stuck out to me how few red meat social conservative issues were among the Senate's top 40 priorities. I think you can make an argument that a big reason for that is that they've done a lot already.
I was going to ask Derek, do you think we've run out of issues?
Oh, we're good. We're good.
There's always more to find.
I think we'll be fine.
But also with the Lieutenant Governor, to me, my read on it was he was a lot more focused on legacy things for him. He's closer to the end of his career than he is the beginning, right? So you saw things like DIPRIT, the Dementia Research Institute. That's something that he can, when he's done, he can really hang his hat on and say, we did that. The Hollywood Fund, which I know there's a lot of competing arguments for and against that. He was very much for it. That was a theme that stuck out to me, that the Lieutenant Governor was less red meat conservative in the list of priorities he had. He had a couple. You mentioned the Ten Commandments in schools, prayer in schools, but it just was less pronounced this time around. And I think there's a few different reasons for that. Part of it is they have accomplished a lot of it already.
What about guns? That's also another big red meat conservative issue. And I don't feel like there was a lot this session.
The SBR one passed, didn't it? Did it?
Yeah, I know it passed the House. I don't know. I don't remember if it.
I'll have to look that up.
The silencers.
Well, silencers went through to Brad's point. Silencers went through in 21.
Okay.
Remember, because it had that weird clause that if somebody gets arrested, then the Attorney General must intervene and all that. And again, this is like people think that like, oh, we're going to give every baby upon their birth a machine gun in Texas again. I'm more than happy to have that policy.
Right.
Yeah, Derek approved. But no, they're like, oh, well, this will allow short-barreled rifles and shotguns because, people don't understand how this works. It basically, if you look at the National Firearms Act, that regulates automatic weapons, it regulates the barrel lengths and all that stuff. What's that?
Bazookas,
actually, that's ordnance. That's not fire.
Do you have a recreational Uzi?
A recreational, that thing's like all lock up. Come on, Brad. Come on. Yeah. No. To be honest, I've only actually fired an automatic weapon once, and there's a lot of it has some utility, but a lot of lack of utility too. But that's a whole different.
It's just fun.
Yeah. No, it's sick, dude. It's but that being said, so much of that comes down from the federal level and then has duplicative law within our own statute. And so even if, say, because they're talking about it right now in the big beautiful bill, really addressing some of these key points in the NFA, that stuff would still be illegal in Texas even after it went through at the federal level. And so clearing out some of that brush is important for gun nerds like myself, but it isn't necessarily. I wouldn't even call that under the radar because the people that pay attention to that stuff are know about it, but 99.99% of the other folks do not.
I think the biggest Second Amendment bill it passed was the anti-red flag laws.
That's right. Yeah.
Against extreme risk protection orders. Only what was it, 6-7 years ago there was talk about implementing
them,
Texas red
right.
flag laws, right? And that was a conversation across the whole country, not just in Texas, but here we are now passing this. So I think that was probably the biggest gun-related.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach that Texas takes to it, is not just ensuring our rights, but then like banning future legislation from even coming up.
Well, that less banned future legislation as it enjoined the locals from cooperative agreements with the feds.
Right.
You can't trust them feds with gun rights.
Right. Well, let's talk about under the radar. I mean, there's a lot of the bills that made headlines that you've reported a lot on. Was there anything that was kind of under the radar that you thought was consequential but didn't receive maybe as much attention as it should have had?
Well, you could say the judicial pay thing, although that did get a lot of attention at the end.
That became quite above the radar.
Yeah. Let's see. I thought one that I thought would be bigger at the beginning, but that did not ultimately get across the line was it's really nerdy, the HB 113. That's the Cody Vasut bill, the Statutory Construction Act. That
is really nerdy.
It is.
Here we go.
It is.
Here we go.
But it would have been incredibly consequential in the legislative process. Basically, all this legislative intent talk on the mics would have said judges you can't use that as a way to interpret what the law means when you're in a court case, right?
Okay.
So that's one that comes to mind that didn't pass. I'm gonna have to come back to me on one that did.
That actually did pass. I just looked at the short barrel firearms prohibition, SB 1596. It was Senator Hagenbooz and I believe Richard Hayes carried it in the House, and that did go.
Yeah.
So most under the radar, I'd have to say SB 37. So, look, if you're in higher
that's the higher ed reform bill.
Yeah, if you're in higher ed, and specifically higher ed administration, I guarantee it didn't escape your radar. But, the vast majority of people had no idea it was going through. But if you look at it institutionally on what this did, now, Brad and I had the advantage of going to the University of Cincinnati where, we had a couple crazy, we don't have a gig, a cap them or whatever. We don't have one of those. Yeah. It was a pretty normal Midwestern university, but it also had strong protections. While it did have a faculty senate, their plenary authority was relatively limited. What we see in some of the universities here is that let's just be honest, the appointed board of regents have slowly ascribed power to these faculty senates.
Yeah.
And this bill just comes along and says, hey, inmates, you no longer run the asylum. And that's going to actually lead to institutional change, I believe. So that's going to be, I actually think that's going to be one of the most impactful bills. You're just not going to see that for a decade or two.
And the feature in there that I like the most is the general education, or the ability for the administrators to look at majors where they've got 5 or 6 people that even have those majors, or classes where only 3 or 4 or 5 people are even attending, and say, look, clearly there's no market for these crazy classes. Let's stop offering them and actually get kids back to learning things that are going to deliver marketable skills whenever they graduate.
Underwater basket weaving, hardest hit.
Yeah.
See, that's a good thing we're in the NIL, or Ohio State would be in a lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I got one for under the radar.
All right.
There was a bill. It was actually by Brian Birdwell in the Senate. Brooks Landgraf carried it. So there's a situation in Grayson County, and this kind of popped up last year when Lieutenant Governor went there for a town hall. Everyone was like, what the heck is he doing? Like, this is random. Uh-huh. Well, it turns out that that town hall was about this aggregate cement kiln plant that was going in, and it created this really weird little fight between YIMBYs and NIMBYs, people that don't want this stuff in their area, which I get and I understand, but it went well beyond that. There is a semiconductor manufacturing plant there in Sherman nearby, and they're making these unique, first of its kind, at least in the U.S., silicon crystals that then are used to make these wafers for microchips. And this is a huge thing because part of national security, this push over the last few years, is to bring back semiconductor manufacturing to the United States. Well, this stuff is unique because it has to be in like the higher tech, like fighter jets, things like that, missiles, I assume. And this cement kiln, which literally, blasts bedrock to get the rock that they use to make cement, would disrupt that semiconductor plant's operations. And so you had this really fascinating lobby fight within the legislature that just blew up on the House floor. Ultimately, it passed. But this was not just a state of Texas thing. You had the White House calling in and telling people, vote for this because we have to protect this one facility because there's nothing else in the country that makes these things like that.
Yeah, I'm very under the radar.
Yeah, so very consequential.
First I've heard of it, actually, and it blew up on the floor.
Didn't read my article? Come on, Brian.
No. That's my bad. For me, I mentioned SB 12. I just think this is going to be, hopefully will create a cultural shift in K through 12 education because, the days of dropping your kid off and watching them walk through the schoolhouse doors and then the teachers and administrators there and other, employees just saying, we're going to do whatever we want to do, beyond these doors. Those days have to be over. I mean, it's, parents need to know what's going on in the schools, and SB 12 does a lot. Yes, it does. If you've heard about this bill at all, it's probably because it outlaws DEI in K through 12 education. That's kind of what the press mostly pushed it as, kind of this like anti-LGBTQ.
Oh, the Don't Say Gay bill.
The bill, which it does. I mean, it definitely bans DEI. It definitely eliminates any kind of radical gender ideology instruction in schools, and it prevents any kind of social transitioning at the schools. We're going to get back to academics, but it also requires that schools have to tell if anything happens to your kid, whether they have any kind of change in health or change in well-being. You don't get to have this special relationship with the kid outside of the parent's knowledge or consent. Is that if anything changes at all, you have to immediately involve the parent and bring them in and let them know that something's going on with their kids at school. I mean, these kids are at school for 6, 7, 8 hours a day. Yes, teachers are, some of the biggest influences in these kids' lives, but you can't block out the parents. And I mean, one of the prohibitions is if you can't encourage the child not to talk about these things with their parents. I mean, that's crazy that even is a thing out there. And unless you have some serious concrete evidence, some real legitimate concern that the parent is abusing the child over some kind of issue, but even then you have to report them to authorities. You can't just decide that you the teacher and the child are going to talk about these things. You have to involve the parents. And so any kind of change in the student's mental, emotional, physical health needs to be conveyed to the parent. There was an issue with questionnaires, like these health questionnaires that had all the LGBTQ questions on it. You can't give those questionnaires to kids anymore without the parents' consent. Here's a really key one, is that schools must now post on their website instructional plans for each class and provide an online portal for parents to submit comments to administrators and the board. I mean, this is something, what are you going to be teaching my kid throughout the year? You can't just make it up on Monday and decide that's what you're going to be talking about, Googling lesson plans and things like that. You have to tell parents what's going to be talked about in schools, and then you have to provide a portal for them to go in and say, I saw this, I don't like this, or what's the purpose of talking about this in class in an actual way for parents to comment. Hopefully it doesn't turn into comment sections like we see on social media. Hopefully it's used responsibly. But any kind of written records regarding their child, including now the books that kids will check out, that all has to be conveyed. And then probably most importantly, I can't believe this was a problem too, but if an employee suspects that any kind of crime has been committed against their child, they have to report that to the parent within 24 hours. So a lot of transparency. I could go on a soapbox about this all day, but a lot of transparency in schools that were finally opening up. And this wasn't just about preventing DEI. This was about making sure that parents know exactly what's going on with their kids in schools. And that starts September 1st. So hopefully parents will get more engaged and know much more about what's going on in their schools. Anything on education, Brad? I mean, this felt like there was a lot. Derek mentioned the higher education reform bill. We also had the school funding bill, which was a big fight over that. But anything else on the education front?
I think I'll circle back on the ESA program and just comment that was a massive political win for the governor. He put all this money that he was given into a massive political fight, and he came out on top. Mm-hmm. And you could say, oh yeah, it was a foregone conclusion. in the middle of session when, as we're trying to get this passed. It really wasn't. There was a lot of hesitation about various aspects of the proposals from Republicans, but ultimately they got it across the line. And that was because all three of the big three were working in concert together. Obviously there are criticisms of it. We'll see how it's implemented. I think this thing's not going away because with any big program, you're going to have bumps, right? Then you add the fact that we don't know who's going to be comptroller next, who's going to actually be implementing this program,
right?
Unless Glenn Hager can get that up and running in a month,
No,
less than a month
not
now.
do that, no.
Doubt it. But as a political issue, this is probably the governor's biggest win that he's had. Bail was a big one too, but this, I think, he didn't go in on anything like this until he did it last year. And
well, we talked about a lot of the wins. I wouldn't call them necessarily losses. We don't have losses. We have wins in progress. You mentioned the Alders bill that didn't get done. That will almost certainly come back next session. Any other specific bills you think that didn't get done that will that should have gotten done or will get done next time? I
said early on in session, I think there's a better chance that a taxpayer-funded lobbying ban passes than we've ever seen before because I know the speaker is personally for it. That didn't happen. And I don't know why it got lost in the shuffle.
Wasn't really a big push at all, really.
No, well,
considering how
it got watered down in the Senate, right? And so I think that took a lot of the wind out of the sails. I think that's something that they'll come back to next session and try and pass. Especially the conservative activists have been pushing that for years, and questions on how you actually fashion it. But overall, I was pretty surprised because I thought I kind of stick my flag in the ground on that. I think this thing could actually get legs this time in the chamber that it hasn't had.
Derek,
before.
It's kind of a hard bill to really explain to people what the problem is. It's only, directly, it's only about $80 to $100 million a year gets spent on it, and you're talking about, school districts that spend $100 billion a year. So this is, but it does have a major impact. So, do you think maybe the messaging issues, or how do we tell the story of,
Well, we first explain to them. We crack open the law code and we say, Government Code, Section 305. Now, read with me. No. So it's one of those ones where it doesn't. I mean, it's really tough to get into a 30-second elevator pitch, right? But it's also one of the ones where it is easy. I shouldn't say easy, but it is the most graspable part of it is how it actually puts in basically an intermediary between the voter and other levels of government. Now, we've talked about this before.
At voters' expense.
At the voters' expense, in order to have further expense of the voter, oftentimes. And so I think that some of the messaging, and the one thing that we'll have to evaluate, is less so much that, does the city of Austin have a person tasked, from Hillco to go talk to the transportation committee or something like that. It's more the issue of these people are not representing the people. They are representing a government elected by the people, but the government into itself. This is not like the positions that the legislative agenda as these cities come up with is not determined by plebiscite. It's not determined by popular election. People in Austin vote on the individuals who do this, but they are basically committing money towards a pursuit of something that 10 city councilmen came up with, or councilpersons came up, or maybe 6 of the 10, And so that's where the issue, I think, comes home to roost, is that it's really anti-democratic. And I think that, for whatever reason, the reason it was watered down in the Senate didn't seem much, didn't see a whole lot of life in the House is not because the people don't get that. I think people do get that, but I think the people who benefit from it get it as well.
Yeah, I think people have the notion that these lobbyists are lobbying on behalf of the communities, right? Like the city of Austin or the city of Dallas or whatever. Like that's what the lobbyists are doing, and they're not. You make a really good point. They're lobbying on behalf of the government entity, and government entities always want more money and more authority, and so which is usually against the wishes of the taxpayer, because the taxpayer, they want to keep their authority, or they want to, they want more autonomy or more transparency, or they want to keep more of their property tax dollars. And so really trying to convey to people that, like, these lobbyists are not lobbying on behalf of the community and what the communities want and need. They're lobbying on behalf of the government, who wants more money and more authority, to do things.
Yeah, I think we kind of benight the government as democratically elected, but that doesn't mean democratic in function.
Yeah. Did you have, was that your thing that didn't get done, or?
Oh, it's a thing that didn't get done. About 90% of the bills didn't get done. No, there's...
Was it 5,000? What was there? 6,600 bills that were, and they only passed 1,200. So lots to choose from.
Yeah.
No, the big thing that didn't get done is 715. That's where I have to go with the firming bill.
Energy. So the energy.
Yeah, and so this is a bill that actually would have required non-dispatchable, unreliable, as Jason Isaac would call them, sources of generation to actually deliver upon a percentage of their nameplate capacity. And at the beginning of the session, it was looking like it was going well. We had champions in both chambers, not getting too many headwinds, and we're like, oh, so this is gonna, kind of bring the puck rolling up a little sooner. But then certain folks got involved. We don't have to go into too much of the inside baseball, but people that represented some interests, seemingly counterintuitive to their base interests, came down on certain sides of that and kind of gummed it up. And so, I would say that one, which would have, again, basically said that if you're entering onto the grid, you need to essentially deliver what you promise or have an arrangement wherein you can. That was one that was left at the drawing board.
For me, we don't have to go too deep, because I want to ask Brad a question about tech policy, because it seems like Texas really took the lead on a lot of tech policy this year. But for me, it was, and this is related to that, was banning social media for minors. I know eventually, we'll probably get down to banning it for 13 and under, or 16 and under, or something like that. But I really think that the research is demonstrating, unequivocally, that social media is terrible for kids, and not that it's going to stop kids from necessarily getting on there, but it certainly will help. And so hopefully that comes back around. I know Representative Patterson has already spoken on this and says, we're not stopping this fight. So in that sense, there were a lot of tech related bills. I mean, AI was a huge, AI regulation was a huge one this time, but. What do you make of that? You don't have to jump into any of the bills or whatever, but I mean, did it feel like to you that Texas made this a priority, technology related innovations and creating Texas as a leader on tech? I mean, we have obviously Tesla here, Joe Lonsdale's here, a lot of folks moving from California. And so it's almost like, hey, we've got the talent and we've got some of the leaders on this. Why not take advantage of it and create a safe space for tech to thrive in a place like Texas?
Well, I think the one that may be most consequential there, I forget the number, but the intention is to make it more friendly for corporate headquarters to relocate here rather than what's the main one, Delaware.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
We see the Texas Stock Exchange coming up. We already see Tesla here. Apple has a big operation here. Then you throw in the fact that the practical side of it, SB 6 passed, which we already are seeing all these data centers come in, but they have a very massive need for energy, and we have to know where they're going. One of the stats that shocked me most this session was, I think it was Waco, Hillsboro area. There's data center coming in, and it's going to literally double their electricity footprint. It might be 2 data centers, but regardless, these are projects that are coming.
After they added to the Buc-ee's, I don't know what they where all that power is coming from.
Yeah, and so you have to figure out a way to provide the logistical support for these things if we're going to even entertain the massive growth of this artificial intelligence side industry in Texas.
So hopefully they get ahead of that.
Yeah.
As well,
So you got the regulatory side support. You've got the guidelines on interconnecting to the grid. Texas is trying to be the leader on this, and we've got the space, like land space, to support this, and also clearly the intent from political leaders.
All right, so I hate to even say it, but we gotta throw it out there, the S word. Do you think there's going to be a special session, and if so, on what? Who wants to take the first?
Got it.
Yes, I do think there will be one. There's a lot of buzz. I don't think it'll contain much policy. There's a lot of buzz in the Capitol about a redistricting special, and the reason would be there are 2 gettable congressional districts in South Texas, and Republicans already have a slim majority in that U.S. House. And just as midterms tend to go against the party who occupies the White House, there's no way Texas is the only one who's looking at this, redrawing congressional maps. We'll see if the governor pulls the trigger on it. The incentives are there. The question is, how do you keep Democrats in town for that? Because why would they stay and just take the lumps, right? Back in 2003, when we did mid-decade redistricting, both Democrats in both chambers broke quorum. So the precedence there for both to do this in the first place and to have a contentious fight over it. The other thing, you kind of alluded to it earlier, but the $11-12 billion in border reimbursements is probably going to be coming to Texas. You can put that on the call and see if Democrats stick in town for that to try and have a big enough of a say on how that's dispersed as it put back into their communities on the border.
Yeah.
There are, I think, 8 to 12, I forget the exact number, Democrats in Texas, in the Texas House, whose districts Trump won. And so most of those are along the border. There's a lot of incentives there to try and stem the bleeding on this for those Democratic members. And that's the buzz I'm hearing on it. You may have some policy that didn't make it get tossed in the mix as well. I don't think it'll be bail reform, though. I think they're taking the win on SJR 5, and they're not going to push. I just don't see the votes there on 87. I don't see it getting.
Brad said nothing about one.
So Brad says yes, but not on policy reasons, but for more political reasons. Any policy reasons to come back?
Oh, no, that just reminded me of that. Remember that Chappelle show skit? Like, man, I knew I shouldn't have called on you. So I'm. As of now, on June 6th, I'm a no.
Yeah.
I'm not privy to the Capitol gossip to the level that the Brad is for sure. But I would just say that it's such an expenditure of political capital that the incentives have to be there, but it would also have to have we would have to be guaranteed juice for the squeeze. I think for the governor to do that. I definitely don't disagree with him on the prospects of a bail special or bail being part of a special. I think that's that just given the lift that already happened, and then besides that can come back in, in the 90th legislature in 2027. But the only wobbler that we have is, again, we're going to see what happens with SB 3. Does it get pockets? I'm generally of your persuasion that it's a pocket signing. But could he, given because a lot of the ire that was solely in the one chamber and then briefly in the other is now on the governor, is he going to say, you know what, we didn't really have this discussion, there's another way to do this, and then bring them back or have them pre-negotiate and then bring them back for more of a planned special? That's kind of where I would kind of lean into that camp, but I'm still not necessary. I see that being more rare than probable.
Yeah.
Well, the other strategy he could do is veto it and then issue restrictions or enforcement directives through agencies,
That's true.
Crack down that way on this stuff, but I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I think it's a low probability unless they do they come back for the political stuff. So then what does happen during the interim? And one really important part of that are the interim charges, because it starts to give, and that doesn't happen until the fall, but I wanted, Derek, if you had any thoughts on any kind of issues you think that would actually come up in the interim, because that's a big one. I mean, we saw one that was not on anybody's radar was squatters, right? Was the squatters issue, but that started to be an issue in other states. And then when members started to look at well, what do our laws say about this? And we TPPF highlighted some horrific stories of people losing their properties, and and the fact that the law didn't work for the property owner, it worked in favor of the squatter. You then had that we put Lieutenant Patrick. Governor Patrick put it on the interim charge, and then we got it done this session. And so those issues can pop up, and the interim charges are a good way to see kind of what priorities members are looking at. So anything on the radar in terms of what they'll be researching this during the interim? Well,
I think you're always going to have, it's a cop-out answer, but you're always going to have the implementation of the major bills. So I think you are probably going to see, especially with the upfront appropriation of, was it 2.5 on the water, he said?
Yeah.
With the 2.5 on the water, you're probably going to see an implementation charge on that. And not only that, but like something that big probably should be part of the interim process, even if it's just a monitoring sort of thing. I think you're going to see. You're probably going to see some like, well, what does the border look like now under a Trump administration? You know, because we had some good bills that went through, some that didn't, regarding the border here in this last session. I think you're going to see other ones in public safety that you might not expect. Like I think one of the things that I've been hearing a lot around the Capitol, closer towards the end, is a push to see to basically check on the moral injury of first responders, which sounds like like this arcane thing, but we back the blue here. We support our police. The problem is being a police officer, a firefighter, or EMS is not easy. And so do we have the right systems in place in order to catch them before something tragic happens? And that also has a ancillary benefit of getting better police and firefighters and everything like that. I think you're going to see interim charges as well, probably involving it's one of the things we didn't talk about, things that didn't get done because we didn't really engage on it, but like the whole SB 30 area, I think that we're going
What's
to that was a tort reform bill. I think that we're going to see, because that became such a big thing, and even though that got across the goal line, it probably didn't get across the goal line in the form that a lot of people
it didn't get across the goal line.
Oh, didn't get across, but didn't Bonins get across in the House, but they didn't come to an agreement in conference. Oh, okay. Yeah, so in that case, then we will definitely be having one. Yes. Sorry, I was busy making sure those judges got their pay before having to sit for civil liability cases.
Well, I think Brad's right too, though, that how do we grow responsibly with AI? That we want to be a hub for that. We want to encourage that.
Tech's going to be a big one.
Yeah, but how do we afford? How do we afford it? What are the regulations? How are they implemented? And then how do we get the power that's needed for that kind of industry to grow?
Texas Skynet.
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to see them talk about and at least acknowledge the possibility of is, what if we have an economic downturn? Right, it's possible. And we've grown the budget so much that now we have all these liabilities. What happens if we don't have any surplus next time around? It's been a lot of feasting and no famine anytime recently, and you just got kind of caught in the line of thinking of expecting another surplus. And maybe we have one, right? But we've already seen the one from 23 drop to about $10 billion in just the Treasury surplus. But
33%.
Right. So what happens if we are in a dire situation? Where do we cut? They need to have a game plan, I think, going in. You can't be caught off guard in a session, especially given all this random, as mentioned earlier, all the random stuff that happens that you can't account for. Yeah. They need to figure out, have a blueprint for an emergency situation when the finances just aren't there.
And if you ask the public, one of the number one issues is still property tax reform or property tax relief. And though the state keeps giving property tax relief, we talk about it on the show all the time, how the locals come in and they issue these massive bonds, or they raise taxes, or they and they're just very brazen about it and saying, look, because of what the state's doing and giving relief, we can raise taxes and the taxpayer won't feel it. They'll think it's just maintaining the same level, when in fact it's the locals stealing your tax cut. So again, this is one of those balance things. There are heavy-handed things that the state government can do.
One of those was mentioned in Abbott's State of the State address that didn't go anywhere. It was a 2/3 requirement for voters to approve a local bond, and that I'm sure we're going to revisit that at some point. But
it's a real thing, because the state is doing its part. It's it's using a measured approach to try and give tax relief to taxpayers. But when the locals come in and take it up, it's like, well, then we have to get more heavy-handed. And again, that's not something that conservatives would generally support. More government regulation or more government imposition. But if the locals are not going to allow taxpayers to feel real tax relief, then the state has to do something. It has to step in. And there are heavy-handed measures that are still on the table that they can use.
Well, who's going to furnish the airport with new art, Brian? You? Brad, you are going to do this?
Terrible drawer.
But you're right, though. My pushback on that would be government regulating government doesn't stick in my craw at all.
No.
I think that how that relief or how relief gets delivered in the future, probably more so in the vein of reform, is going to be the topic of discussion.
But we did get Texas time across the finish line, so hopefully we will finally rid ourselves of the scourge of having to set our clocks back and forward twice a year.
Well, Congress has to act for that, right?
Yeah, that's it. Is there a way? Can we just? I mean, like with
we can ask for. We don't. Well, I don't say again. Don't even ask for forgiveness or permission.
You can go. I think you can go one direction, but you can't go the other, which was the purpose of the bill. I don't know the delineation there, but I'm for whichever gives me more sunlight in the evening, so I'm not driving home from work at pitch black. You know,
we had an individual that used to be with the foundation who her argument was, I just want the one that gives me more sunlight, and when I came to in the hospital from the aneurysm, I calmly explained why that was not necessarily feasible.
You get all the sunlight you're going to get in a day. Like, regardless of what time it is, you're going to get all the sunlight. Don't worry about it. All right. Anything we didn't hit that was the biggest? I feel like we've gotten, everything to it. I mean, we talked about the border bills, but anything that was a major storyline that we didn't hit yet?
Well, it's a lead-in into the primaries, and I know it's not a political show, but it's going to be fascinating to watch what exactly happens next year in the Republican primary, and then obviously the general election. Everyone's kind of getting situated. We hear a lot of names popping up about topping the Democratic side of the ticket. Also, we already have Paxton versus Cornyn. Will others jump in? You have the rest of the statewides. It's just going to be wall-to-wall busy and intrigue, I would say, because the last election cycle was just wild as heck. This one is going to be maybe not quite to that level, because you're not going to see Greg Abbott go to war against Republican incumbents, but it's still going to be plenty of stuff to watch and be entertained by, because that's what this is now. This is entertainment.
You're not entertained.
No interim for you then. You'll be just as busy covering all these major stories. Well, awesome. Well, that's our time for the wrap-up. So I'm sure we'll have you back at the end of the year to talk about all those fun things that we talk about at the end of the year. So thanks, Brad, for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And as we like to say at the end of every show, do good and suffer the consequences.
You're doing great, Brian.
Man, I'm always messed it up. Do good and risk the consequences. The immortal words of Sam Houston. We'll see you next time.